Okay, so I've been wanting to do a video about what is possibly one of the best contemporary shows alive right now. Enough talking about bad shows. It sounds like I'm always speaking badly of shows, but here's an example of something that is fantastic, that is just really top notch all the way through. I mean, it's on the level of what Sopranos put on the table now 20 years ago or over 20 years ago. Why? Because the writing is impeccable. The creator is actually working. I mean, I don't know him, but either it's part experience, part something that he's really been obsessed about. Between, I mean, yes, you have the the Mexican drug cartel aspect that I'm a sucker for mafia stuff because of it feels that mafia dramas deal with the realities of human behavior without any filters, without any BS, where the behaviors of the characters are dictated by actual um, how they would actually behave in real life, or there's no need to sell us uh, what's the word? There's no need to sell us a um, moral at the end of the story, so there's no need for BS. But this one is interesting because it brings the whole lawyer culture, which I mean, most of us are not privy to or really involved in, kind of the way Mad Men brought the advertising world as well into the forefront, even though it's also a time period piece and did not involve any kind of drug cartel. Um, Breaking Bad was successful because it skirted that territory where, yeah, it dealt with drug cartel drama, the high stakes um, level of it, but at the same time, it brought us mostly human behavior, no, normal characters that live normal lives. In the case of Walter White being a teacher who gets caught up in all of this, and then we go on that journey with that character. And Better Call Saul, I would say, is actually superior to Breaking Bad. When this spinoff happened, I was like, whatever, they're trying to make money off something that was successful. But I think in the end, Better Call Saul has turned out to be a much better show than even Breaking Bad because it's kind of like half Narcos and half House of Cards. House of Cards was so good because there was so material, there was no filler. It was all material, and it was telling you, it kept getting deeper and deeper into how these personalities behave, the whole political culture, and how nefarious it is, and the people that get caught up in it, and the people that are pulling the strings. And Better Call Saul does the same thing. And fortunately, 5 seasons down the road, I mean, I thought they were going to run out of energy, but instead they have more energy than ever. It's clear at the end of the fifth season that there is more material coming. There is at least 2 seasons, if not more, of what they're going to unravel here before we get to where this is eventually going to tie into Breaking Bad. And obviously, we know that the biggest tragedy of Better Call Saul is Kim Wexler. We know that she is at some point going to be out of the picture, and it's going to be a tragedy for her to be out of the picture. We also have the character of Ignacio Vargas that in this season finally we get some cemented understanding of where he's going to end up. This season, I would say, it's interesting how these really good shows, they really take their stride when they're into their fourth and fifth seasons. Those tend to be the best seasons of a show, the third, fourth, fifth, if they're lucky to get that far. And hopefully Better Call Saul will continue to deliver. I mean, again, the writing is impeccable. We're going somewhere with this. This isn't just trying to keep you interested for a season of drama because they want to keep you interested, but you get the sense that it is going somewhere. At the end of this road, we are going to end up somewhere, and we are learning things throughout. From the beginning of this show, we've learned so much about Jimmy McGill and his relationship to his brother and his relationship to Even a character like Hamlin, I forgot his first name right now. Howard, yeah, who feels like such a cardboard cutout character, is very integral and becoming more integral as we get to the end of the season, as we find out that he's going to be the key piece to the transformation, honestly, of Kim Wexler into what Jimmy McGill, who becomes Saul Goodman, has become. At the end of the last season, Jimmy McGill became Saul Goodman, and things are tied up very well also in the writing, but not just the writing. The cinematography is film level. If you look even at just the way even that they set up their shots. Right now, I don't remember any of the technical language, so I'm not going to waste time with it. But it's easily observable and it's pleasing to the eye. And I've picked out stills in here that exemplify that. The cinematography is great. The freaking costumes are great. I love what these guys are wearing half of the time. There's so much personality behind it. The money that's being spent on screen is being seen on screen. The acting is amazing, whether it's because they just did really good casting in terms of picking actors that fit the roles, or whether they were directed properly, or plus whatever they brought to the table. The acting is natural. The acting is loose. The directing allows them to take their time in absorbing those moments without rushing through them or sounding plastic. So that's just the overall assessment of this show as a show. But as we get through it and as we progress through these stills, we really get to see why it shines so beautifully and why we can expect something more, way beyond all the crappy stuff that I've talked about with Rings of Power and everybody praising House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon does not even come to the knees of this show. It is sad that a show like that gets more attention because of HBO and because of the books and all the drama involved around it. And a show like Better Call Saul, most people are going to sleep on, when it's really a tour de force of everything. It's really a film, on canvas through TV, something that we didn't know could be possible until Sopranos came on board 20 years ago, where we saw that film level, that TV had ascended to a level of film in all aspects, writing, acting, directing, and cinematography, editing, etc. Music, the use of music in the show as well is just so specific. You really get that old sense of there's a mastermind behind this who's thought about it, who's thought about every shot, every scene, who's thought about the ambiance of it, how even the music usage creates a mood and a style for the show that we saw in Breaking Bad. And now, after the success of that, you get the feeling like, this was really what he wanted to do, kind of like how Mad Men was the case for its creator. So this season opens up, every season has opened up with the fact that we know Breaking Bad, and we know that Saul Goodman escaped from his life that we witnessed in Breaking Bad and his involvement in everything with Walter White, and is now living incognito somewhere. But yet drama seems to be following him. It's kind of that sense of like you can't escape your past. And this guy, who obviously also has a history, comes up to him, and it's a low-key threat. I love how this show has so much subtext. It's not so much about what's being said, but what's being shown and what the tension being created between the actual actors gives you. And we get that in this scene with this guy who is a cab driver, but clearly has some kind of nefarious past. If he knows about Saul Goodman, he may also be hiding out, but he is low-key threatening him and telling him, you can't bullshit me. I know who you are. And Saul Goodman takes it for what it is. He knows what it's coming up to, and he his first reaction is flight, right? His whole reaction throughout the entire series in the black and white, instead of it being a back flashback, it's actually a flash forward. The show itself is a flashback. Um, so in these flash forward scenes, Saul Goodman is always running away, running away, running away from his past. And here he finally, in the moment that he decides to run away yet again, he decides no, he's going to fight, and it leaves it at that. Um, every season opens up with a flash forward episode, and then it drops it, and then we don't really get to see any more until the next season, which is interesting and also quite a tease. Um, we had the introduction in the last season of Eduardo Salamanca, aka Lalo. And what's great about this character, I really love this character, honestly. He's always smiling. He's almost like the Joker. All he's missing is the freaking body paint, the face paint, excuse me. And what I like about Lalo is that he doesn't take anybody's word for granted. He wants to check everything out for himself. And that's an important motif for his character throughout this season and in general for his character, because it's how he gets to the bottom of things. And it's whenever he doesn't and he places faith in anyone around him that he has missteps. But essentially, he's a show me type of guy. And that's an important thing about this character as he progresses. Already from the beginning, he's fishing for information concerning Gus Fring and just in general about how things are being operated since he's come up north now that his uncle, I think it's his uncle, has had his tragic, he ended up in the hospital. Now he can't speak or talk, yet he's very, very much conscious within his mind and capable of rationalization within his mind, and only Lalo makes that effort to communicate with him, and they even seem to mastermind together despite this the obstacle that Hector has. And so he finds out from Ignacio Vargas, aka Nacho, he finds out that people are complaining about the drugs that they're selling. Of course, everything is always a setup from either Gus Fring or from Bolsa, who's the boss of both, and their intermediary with the big head honcho, which right now I'm not remembering his name. Don Eduardo, man, I don't remember right now. Nonetheless, he says, show me, and he goes and he inspects their drugs for himself, and he uncovers the fact that they do have, someone has been messing with their drugs. Some of it is not good quality. And so this leads to Gus Fring admitting what he's been doing, or rather coming up with a fake story. And Lalo can pretty much read bullshit, but he focuses, unlike Hector, who was always a kind of a hothead, kind of like Tuco, who I guess will come much later. Lalo is very much focused on what he wants to uncover. He knows Gus Fring is doing something, that he's got a construction project, which was the main focus of the last season, which ended up halfway. So right now we don't know how it's going to end up getting done, but we know it will get done because in Breaking Bad it already exists. He wants to know what this construction project is, and Gus Fring seems to have anticipated all of that and has come up with a backstory and takes him to a fake warehouse. And this is where Bolsa steps in between them and tells them, okay, obviously Bolsa's aware of their bullshit and is playing them off of each other, and it's not clear to them yet that that's happening, but it is clear to them that they are messing with each other, and that they need to that this Cold War is becoming a hot war quick. Bolsa tells them they have to coexist. I picked these stills because the cinematography and the framing is excellent. I mean, you will see constantly I don't know the terminology anymore, but like how everything is in threes. as you look at these stills. You'll see how most of the time everything is in threes and framed in such a way. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's what every film school has taught since they learned from the greats that first initiated these things, the mise en scène from the 40s and 50s. And you just can't escape seeing how every shot has had that kind of thinking put into it, honestly. After this incident, we cut back to the German architects that had been working on that construction project without their fearless leader who had to be assassinated in the last season. They're all sent back to Germany separately in different ways. And it's interesting to see that this is the only thing that seems to really hurt Michael Ehrmantraut. Am I saying his name right? Ehrmantraut. Where, this guy's a hardball guy. Nothing affects him. He's had to go through the murder of his own son, I guess, way back when he used to be a policeman. Obviously, that has changed him for life. And nothing affects him, yet what happened with his involvement in having to assassinate the master architect, when this guy tells him that that master architect was worth 50 of him, it really, you can see the pain, and that's what this still is about, is where you can see the pain that he's suffering from that slight. That slight is worse than anything else anybody else could have said to him, and it's the beginning of his spiraling down in his story arc through the season, and ultimately having to, find a way forward from that, because he realizes that what he is pretty much he's become a scumbag. Anyway, after this, Nacho gets picked up and pretty much is intimidated into collaborating and cooperating with Gus Fring, even though he's in the Salamanca crew or the Salamanca family gang. Gus Fring wants to use him as an insider guy and an informant, and wants to make sure that he doesn't fuck around. And he does that by showing him that if he doesn't, he will literally murder his father. This sounds like, typical gangster stuff, but there's actually a very interesting psychological point to it that doesn't get really answered until much later in the season, and I did save that, so I'll wait till we get to that point. In this season, there's a lot of playfulness that Saul Goodman's character is trying to achieve with Kim. We've gotten past the relationship with them is an awkward one, right? They're both broken people who have found each other, which is kind of the endearing part of them, and who are trying to build a life together despite these difficulties, that their personal difficulties. And it's in these lighthearted moments that we can see that they could be a normal functioning couple if it wasn't for the proclivities that they each have of getting themselves into trouble, which, as we progress in the season, we really get to see where that goes. This is the last moment of Hector and Lalo, where we see that even though Lalo is not really a mastermind, he's really more like a top muscle guy. And it's Hector who's always, but despite his hot-headedness, who knows what is going on, is aware of everybody's motivations. And here he is the one that tells him, like, basically, if you want to take out Gus Fring, because that's they are both in cahoots about, you need to pick away at his money. You need to destroy his income sources so that the big boss won't favor him as much. And that really comes from Hector, despite the fact that he can't speak, he can't really communicate. All he's got is a bell. And yet they're able to communicate symbiotically. And there is a moment much later in the season when Lalo has to finally step away because of his own, well, we'll get to it, but he has to leave and go back south to Mexico, and we sense from that last interaction between Hector and him that that's really going to hurt Lalo, and that's going to hurt the Salamanca family, because Hector, even in his current state, is still pretty much the man in charge. He's still pretty much the man that knows what moves need to be made. And without him, Lalo is kind of lost in the wilderness. So one of the first things that happens is that one of their drug houses, the Salamanca drug houses, get busted. And obviously Nacho has, now he has motivation to try to win him over, to win Lalo over and make him trust him so that he can be a useful informant to Gus Fring. And so he, Nacho is constantly having to put himself at risk just to survive. He's a dog constantly running and treading water. So he actually busts into the drug house while the cops are trying to bust in there to take the stuff, the drugs, and catch it before they get there, and somehow get out and get back into the car where Lalo is observing all of this, and he manages to do it. So that's a victory, I suppose, for him. And meanwhile, Saul Goodman is trying to build his practice, and he shows already in this season the Saul Goodman that we come to know and love or hate from Breaking Bad, who is willing to do anything that is necessary to win for his clients, meaning which is ultimately to win for himself, because that's how he's going to make his money, and he gets a thrill out of it. So he bribes one of the people that work in this building to make the elevator shut down while he's stuck in here with this lawyer that he's been trying to corner her all week, so that they can just come to deals regarding several clients that they are both representing. And this is how he manages to do it. Them being stuck in the elevator forces them to just have an actual chat, something that he would have never achieved otherwise, and goes to show to what lengths Saul Goodman is willing to go, right, to achieve his ends. Something that, interestingly, within this season gets questioned, because of he sees how far he can go, and there is such a thing as too far, even for him, right? Interestingly enough, I thought this was interesting with the ants. There's always a lot of visual symbolism in Better Call Saul and in Breaking Bad, and it's always semi-humorous. I can't play the music that they had playing over this, but they did have some like yodeling music, and it's interesting to see the parallels that, again, this creator draws with simplicity, visual simplicity, where Saul had dropped a ice cream cone in the sidewalk, and within minutes it swarmed over by ants. And it's a great visual assessment of how humanity works, right? As well, we're no different than these ants. The moment we have something that is sweet, we all swarm and fight over it until the last morsel is there. And I'm sure there's even more symbolism than that right now I'm missing. But Lalo finally comes in, has Nacho bring Saul in, because he realizes now that he needs this man. One of their guys, in the last thing, when the cops busted their drug house, they took one of their guys, and Lalo wants to use this guy now. This entire season, we have Gus and we have Lalo trying to make moves against each other surreptitiously. And Lalo's attempt right now is basically to use the guy that the cops captured to now get the federal DEA involved and tell them about Gus Fring's dead drops for their cash. And that way, again, follow through with what Hector told him, which is to hurt Gus Fring where it hurts most, which is in his pocketbooks, because that's the way the boss is going to no longer favor him, and hopefully give Salamanca an advantage. Little do they know that Bolsa is playing both of them, But that's where Saul now is getting involved in and over his head. He seems to be wary of it, but nonetheless, he makes his decision, which is an important point because later on there's a whole discussion between him and Michael Ehrmantraut about those small decisions that we make that put us on a road, and how even if we try to get off of that road, there's really no way out of it. Once we make that decision, we keep finding ourselves back on that road. And it seems that by the end of this season, Saul has accepted the fact that that is a reality. And there's a sense of loss and death of the soul from that with him, which is really interesting. Nacho as basically is trying to get his father out of the picture. This shot is amazing. Again, the lighting, the use of silhouette, the framing. That's why I chose it. It gives you a sense. It also gives you a sense of privacy. It gives you a sense that you're sitting at a conversation between a father and son that's private, but yet you get to witness it. You get to be in on it. And his father comes in to give him the news that someone wants to buy the shop for a lot of money, which seems really weird. That he had hoped that his son would take over that shop one day. Nacho pretty much laughs that off, and then his father exposes him, saying, basically that he knows that it's Nacho behind the buyer, and that he's trying to get him out of the picture, and that his father is an honest man. His father has, again, they've chosen different paths in their lives, father and son. And it's not so much that it puts them at odds, but that Nacho's choices put his father in danger, and his energies now to try to make his father safe from the lifestyle he has chosen become more and more complicated and difficult because of his father's tenacity to be an honest man, really, just to be an honest man. And it's interesting to see that's how it's sad, right? That's how life works when you fall into this, and in general, and that it really kind of sets also Nacho on a path that we know is not going to end well. The framing, even here, is to be noted, right? We have the wall separating in the middle, the father and son. After this discussion, it's clear that they're divided. They're separated by a wall that cannot be crossed, and from here on out, it's going to be like that. Up until this point in the last season and this season, father and son were trying to meet each other halfway, but this is the last straw. We finally have these guys introduced back from Breaking Bad. These guys were prime characters. I forgot their names though. So and their introduction into the show really is the first hint that we are getting closer and closer to, where Breaking Bad and where Better Call Saul ends and Breaking Bad begins. Where they're going to end up meeting. These guys, they come in with the same gusto that they had on the old show, breaking each other's balls and having that really cynical attitude. Yet they really, at this point, don't know what they're dealing with. They think they are playing the cartels, and the cartels are playing them. The only thing to mention now that I mean. I chose this particular still because this sets a whole. It's interesting how this show uses very specific law situations that are way over most of our heads, but it's what's more important is how these law cases affect the trajectory of the characters, especially the main characters involved. They really give us the unexpected twists and turns, and I do think that is genius. It's better than removing characters like Game of Thrones does because in order to progress the plot line. This actually is an organic and intelligent way of progressing the plot line by giving us things that happen out of the blue, something that used to happen on Sopranos all the time. Sopranos was classic for uh, things that just seemed like happened out of the blue, yet had consequences. And this old man doesn't want to give up his home, and the bank that Kim represents wants him off of the home. By all, they own the property by rights, and they can force him out, but they're just trying to buy him out instead. And it's interesting because the fallout of everything in this season alone and how this progresses leads to Kim eventually just wanting nothing to do with big time law. You know, she made it big, she made her money, she made it big, and that's not enough. And that's really what makes these characters really interesting, especially Kim and Saul Goodman um, as lawyers, because lawyers are boring, right? We don't want to watch lawyers. There's nothing interesting about lawyers. But this show really makes them interesting because uh, we actually get an insight into characters that seem, at the end of the day, despite all of their issues, that they do have things beyond money that motivate them. And I think that's, maybe it's just me, but I mean, I find that extremely fascinating because we are so bombarded constantly with just people that want to talk about money and are motivated solely by money and are protecting their financial interests at the expense and detriment of others. And to see characters that are willing to say, well, you know what? Yeah, I need money, but I also want to be able to do something with my life that I feel makes up for the things I have to do to make money. And that's what I find interesting about this. This is another a great example of why this show is great. The visual representation, right? Earlier or the night prior, she threw these bottles out that she was drinking because she was upset. And the next day, she feels an obligation to clean it up. This is a typical, a visual, a very smart visual way of showing Kim's personality. You know, this is what I'm talking about with good writing and visual writing as it's meant for to be for film and TV, where this act alone tells us so much about her personality that we see in everything else that she is doing as well. Meaning she creates a mess purposely out of emotion, out of an emotional reaction or whatnot, and then she feels responsible to clean it up, you know? But by the end of this season, that is going to change, where she's going to transition into not wanting to make the mess and not wanting to clean it up, but rather wanting to profit from it, you know? And we'll get to that. Again, everything that happens and every interaction that these characters have an influence on the direction that they take. Going back to Ehrmantraut, he, as we said, he had lost motivation because of what happened to the master scientist, his assassination of that, and he felt he's an awful person again. He got into a street brawl with some kids. He got messed up real bad, and Gus Fring takes him to some kind of a memorial that he has in Mexico to help him heal. And there's an interesting conversation between them later on. But it's interesting to see, even again here, talking about the road, that the decisions that we make that lead us down a road that cannot be diverted from. For this brief moment in Ehrmantraut's life, severed from his own family, severed from all of his other associations in the regular world in America, being trapped just in this little paradise, we could say. He sets his energies into fixing stuff, right? There's this windowsill, and it's the wood beam is busted, and he's like, well, I got nothing else to do. Why don't I do something constructive? And it sounds silly when you just say it that way, but there's something really deep about the character that this says, because it goes to show that all things considered, the man wants to be constructive. He wants to uh, build on something, but he's constantly being tugged by these inner demons and by the people that are in the influences in his life on that road that we know will lead down to what eventually will be his role in Breaking Bad and his death much later on in Breaking Bad. So um, it's a significant thing to see. You could have left this out. He didn't necessarily need to be, this didn't necessarily need to be shown, but showing it said so much about the character and what could have been. And also this constant theme of the road that they're all walking on that cannot be diverted. But he has a discussion with Gus Fring, and Gus Fring basically says, essentially he's a soldier on a war path, Ehrmantraut is, who doesn't have a war to fight. And Gus Fring is giving him that war to fight, basically, and using, again, everything is motivated by emotion with human beings. And it's important to understand how emotions play on our decisions, because it's usually those decisions that are irreversible and have a serious effect on the trajectory of our lives. And in the case of Ehrmantraut, he uses revenge, the emotion of revenge, which goes way back to obviously what was done to his son. He's like, we have this in common, right? I'm a cartel gangster. Salamanca's a cartel gangster. There's no reason for you to care about either of us, but I'm trying to get revenge, right? Which we got a hint of. Man, it was like a throwaway conversation between Lalo and Bolsa, even though there's nothing throwaway in this show, where Lalo admits that Hector, I guess, killed the gay lover of Gus Fring, something that we didn't even know, right? In all of Breaking Bad, we never got a sense of Gus Fring having a family or a woman or anything like that, the way we do with the Salamancas. And now we finally get an idea that Gus Fring is kind of gay, that he is gay, and that he must have had a lover that has not been shown to us, that Hector killed before the beginning of this entire show, Better Call Saul. So it's even more of a flashback. And so everything that Gus Fring has against the Salamancas is really since then been motivated by a sense of revenge, which Ehrmantraut can totally relate to. So Gus Fring, not being an idiot, appeals to that sense to get him back on track. And it's something that he kind of needed, even though he didn't really need it, in the sense like he could have been just fine if he had stayed in that memorial and just been living there. But he still has to get back to his family. He has to get back to his life, right? And he had nothing to keep motivate him at that point. So now he is part of Gus Fring's attempt to get at the Salamancas. They're trying to essentially set up Lalo so that it's quite an elaborate plan to get him into jail so that he'll post bail and then run away to Mexico and not be their problem anymore. Because once he goes south of the border, then they can hire mercenaries to kill him and it not being traced back to them, essentially. And Ehrmantraut displays in his attempts to create subterfuge, he shows that he's no different than Saul, that he's just as capable of doing the kind of acting and emotional manipulation that Saul does. But as soon as Ehrmantraut is done with getting what he wants, he stops the act. Unlike Saul, who doesn't know when to stop the act. And that's one of the biggest issues with Saul. We have the continuation of the law case that I was telling you, where basically Saul decides to not tell Kim that he's going to play her. They had one plan going into this, and Saul does something completely different, upsetting her, which is perfect because she was already being implicated in working with Saul, because they are on opposite sides of the same case and they are also lovers. And by Saul playing her and making her actually angry, he's able to achieve what she had originally intended for them to achieve for the old man that didn't want to lose his house, without her being privy to it. And even though she The interesting thing about her is that these things happen between them, and rather than her being emotional and reacting and hating on him, she admires the fact that Saul can play anyone well, right? We saw that at the end of the last season where she finally saw that Saul is constantly playing people, including herself. She got played. The only thing that they don't play with each other is in their actual feelings for each other. But everything else is fair game. So it's constantly like a game, but it's a game with high stakes. So that's an important thing to understand in their relationship and how it continues to develop because of where it leads to at the end of the season. So Lalo gets set up. The cops know exactly where he's at, and he gets taken captive. This is a moment where the other people in the Salamanca family would have probably gone down fighting and shooting, but Lalo is more cool-headed and therefore can live to fight another day, and that's an important thing also about his personality. When Saul confesses to Kim what his plan was and why he did what he did, when they sat in front of Mesa Verde, the client, and the case that I was just talking about, she says, "This was an interesting." This is also interesting. Again, there's no throwaway scenes because she realizes that the games that they play have high stakes, and that if they're going to continue to play them, there's only really two options. One is that they go their separate ways because it can get really dangerous, or they get married so that they can't rat each other out if they get, for whatever reason, pulled into a court of law. So this is the way that Saul and Kim, really Kim pops the big question to Saul about getting married. Very anticlimactic, not the way most people picture themselves being betrothed, but very fitting for these two dysfunctional characters, and says a lot also about them and their relationship and just how it's doomed to fail, I think, long term. We cut back to Gus, and we learn a little bit more about Gus and his, I guess, European connections. There's been a lot of reference in this season to something that happened in Santiago. It's unclear exactly what it was. It seems to be some major fallout, maybe even some kind of a drug cartel war. It's not really expounded on yet, but this is clearly where Gus Fring, as we know him, was born, or reborn, I should say, and where he made the connections that have led him to be who he is. And this European character is one of them. He's clearly given a lot of money from this shell company to Gus for him to, conduct his drug projects. And that construction project that we have been discussing is a major component of that, and it's not completed yet. And there's 4.5 million euros tied into it that his German counterpart here has to constantly cover for, and he's running out of time. So there's a lot of, there's a sense of Gus Fring needs to rein in the Salamancas or destroy them very soon. Otherwise, everything that he's built to get to where he's at is going to fall apart on him. And that's why he's willing to go along with Lalo's attempts to sabotage him through Nacho's, not through Nacho, and Nacho being an informant, letting Gus Fring know. But Gus Fring, it's again another very important characteristic of Gus Fring. He's willing to sacrifice even what he has earned, even what it hurts him to do. He's willing to. He's motivated beyond money, right? There's revenge, yes, but there's also survival involved, and there's something bigger than just the money behind everything that motivates him to do the things that he does. And he's willing to sacrifice something like this Pollos Hermanos building that obviously means a lot to him. It means a lot to him to be a franchise owner, to be a man who came from abject poverty in Chile and be able to be in America as a business owner burning that to the ground has severe emotional implications, but he focuses on the bigger picture. And this is where Gus Fring supersedes the Salamancas, supersedes everybody around him. Um, it's really a miracle that Walter White beat him at the end of Breaking Bad, to be honest. But then again, that was the trajectory of the show, and I would have to watch it again to remember how it really went down. I just remember that being huge. That was a huge thing that Walter was able to achieve. Howard confronts Saul, and it's interesting because Howard seems to be wanting to make amends. He's such a buffoon. He's easy to make fun of. Yet again, he's going to be what I think everything is going to hinge upon here in terms of the Darth Vader type of transformation that Kim Wexler is going to be going through in the next season. And in this season, he's doing everything he can to show that he has evolved without Chuck in his life. He was really reined in by Chuck and was not able to take the firm in the direction that he would have done had Chuck not been in his life. And now that he's gone over that hump, and it was Saul that kind of gave him that impulse originally, that push in the last season to be like, hey, dude, you can't just let this fall apart. And so he kind of admires that about Saul, and he's trying to make amends with him in a sense and be like, why don't you join our team? We could use someone with your gusto. But Saul's beyond that now. He's gotten himself involved with circles that are very dark and involve even greater amounts of money than even a big-ass law firm like HHM has. And he has this just breakdown where he just can't handle it, right? He can't accept, he's so broken, and we're all like that, right? Where we're so broken that when something good finally comes our way, we can't accept it. And it's a very important turning point for Saul, because he could have made a change here for his life for the better finally, of his own energy, of his own efforts, you know what I mean? He got this far, and this could have been his moment, and instead he just turned it down, and now it's all downhill for him. It's kind of that moment. It's similar to that moment in The Sopranos when in the end of the fourth season when Tony murders oh god, I forgot his name right now. Pantoliano is the actor, I believe. That's such a turning point because after that, everything goes down south for him. That was his biggest earner. That was the man that he needed most. And it goes to show that even though he was a cash cow, Tony didn't care at that point. He's so unhinged that he's willing to destroy everything, including his life and his relations, and be left alone. And I remember that the end of that season and that shot, the way it was even shot in The Sopranos, he's just in the dark, in the dark, by himself, calling out to Christopher, and no one's coming to him. And you really get a sense of like, this is where it's hopeless for him. It's hopeless for Tony from here on out. And I feel that's what this was for Saul. This moment, this breakdown for Saul was that moment for him. It's over for him from here on out. It's only going to go south. There is no more Jimmy McGill and the possibility of redemption. And we see that when Lalo approaches him to go pick up his money so that he can get his bail, the $7 million to post bail. And Saul pretends that he's not going to do it, but then he turns around and requests a ridiculous amount for him to be able to deliver that money, $100,000, and to see if Lalo will even go for it. And Lalo says, yeah, go for it. And so we're seeing slowly the money stakes are also being risen, right? Before, in the last season, Saul did a swap where they stole this collectible to then sell it online for $4,000 or $8,000. It wasn't that much. And, that was the beginning. Like everything, it just gets bigger and bigger, right? The more you put at risk, the more you want to put at risk. It's like gambling. And like now he's at 100,000, and then by the end of the season, him and Kim are going to be talking about what they want to do to Howard and how they'll get a payout of $2 million. You know, stuff that they both wouldn't even consider, would not have considered if Saul had taken the job at HHM and if Kim had not given up Mesa Verde. But by the end of this season, I mean, already at this point, he gives up HHM. He gives up that job, right? And it is an interesting point because Howard tells Kim, like, I feel he's a bad influence on you. And she's like, I make my own decisions. But really, when she found out that he gave up that opportunity, well, I mean, I don't think that's exactly when she does it, but they're on the same trajectory. You know, his influence on her becomes very, very clear from last season into this season, where she sees, well, this seems, it's a thrill. They're both becoming like gambling addicts, and they're slowly self-destructing. Saul tells her that he's going to do this, and we see the first sign of, she has a really bad feeling about him doing this for obvious reasons. But the interesting thing about Kim is that she's not a domineering female, but that she respects. This is what is really appealing and sexy and, amazing about her as a woman, is that she can be a real partner, but let the man make his own decisions. And obviously, I mean, these are bad decisions, but nonetheless, that's really admirable on her part, that she won't stifle, because she doesn't want to be stifled either. So they have a kind of respect, mutually respecting relationship that works if it wasn't for all the other self-destructive tendencies that they have. More awesome framing, cinematography wise. Again, the constant threes that we see throughout the show in the framing of the shots, having something in the foreground, the aesthetic aspect of it is very pleasing. Saul, of course, gets ambushed. We find out later that he was ambushed by mercenaries that were hired, and that they were hired by Bolsa. So Bolsa is playing the Salamancas and Fring against each other. He gets saved by Ermintrout. Ermintrout is obviously a sniper. He can knock out all these guys, but one gets away. There's another interesting motif from Breaking Bad. In Breaking Bad, they had that big, what was it, an RV that they were cooking meth out of. And I forget how many seasons in, eventually, like in Breaking Bad, and this creator somehow manages to make vehicles have a personality. Like, vehicles seem to have a personality and carry the weight and the soul of a person in and of itself. That RV was so symbolic of what Walter White becomes, but eventually it has to be destroyed, right? It ends up getting destroyed at some point in one of the seasons, and it's like a transformation for Walter White. And it's the same thing here with Saul. Like, this Ford Esteem has been his vehicle since, I think, season 1. It's given him grief. It's always been a pain in the ass, but it's carried him through all the seasons. It's almost like symbolic. It almost carries his soul. And here we finally have it destroyed. So we have another yet, again, great writing. Who would think of making a vehicle be a symbolism for a person's soul and that transformation or death of that soul as it becomes something dark? And yet that's what we have here. And I felt that was important to point out because I love it. I think it's amazing. We have these guys get lost in the desert. They're about to die or they're close to dying. Saul gives up. It's truly, you do get because they do spend, again, this guy's a film lover. This show creator, this showrunner is a film lover. Like, he knows that he needs to spend time in the desert with these two guys for us as spectators to feel what it would be like to be there. It could have been easily just done fast with a couple of shots, a couple of scenes, but no, we get prolonged and then we get long shots, and also obviously good job with the makeup and everything, where these guys just really look like they're freaking drying up in the desert, um, having to drink their own piss and everything. And um, Saul finally reaches that moment where he just wants to give up. And we have this moment with Ermintrout where we get, again, a sense of the motivation of this character, something that we obviously always knew about him because we've seen his uh, daughter-in-law and his granddaughter in his life, and we know that this is what keeps him going, right? But it's interesting after the events that have occurred. Obviously, Ermintrout does not have any aspirations that he can be redeemed, that he's a redeemable character, or that he can find grace, but rather the way that he's able to continue to go on with his life despite everything is thinking, well, if I have to be this decrepit person, at the very least I'm doing it for some people who are angels. And it's an interesting dynamic. There's moral implications involved with it, right? It's always our family is more important than your family kind of deal. But that is how human beings operate. And the point is that we find different reasons for which we carry on. And this is Ermintrout's reason. Um, because of that, Saul realizes that for him it's Kim. And, you know, sacrifices himself, puts himself on the line so that Ermintrout can finally shoot the last guy that's been following them. Great shot, great action scene this entire episode. It's been a long time since we've had this type of action at all. Better Call Saul has not been that kind of a show until now, and as we get further, it just obviously it is that it's going to become more like Breaking Bad in that sense, which is cool. Love that stuff. But also not losing what it has been building on with its characters for the last 4 seasons. Another shot that I thought was great. I can't obviously don't have the music for you, but another one of those things that this show does, which is lovely, you know, the parallels. Sometimes it's this much on the nose, but it doesn't make it any less humorous, especially with the music. And it gets cut out as soon as he gets a signal on his phone and is able to call Kim. And here we have the first real, like, emotional Kim that we've ever seen. We've never seen Kim break down. We've never seen more than maybe a couple of tears well up. She's a very hard woman to break. And this breaks her, right? She just completely collapsed. This actress sold it. What I love about the acting is just in the show is that none of it ever feels cheapened. It feels to be coming from the core of each individual and what they're bringing to the table, whether that's something that comes from the directing or comes from their own understanding. It's clear that it's deeper than that, because yes, you do have great actors, but then you have an understanding of what you're building towards with these characters, and you really get that here with her, where, you know, for her to break down, it's a huge thing after 5 seasons of a woman who has just been stone cold in terms of sealing up her own emotions. I had chosen this shot because they have a discussion where he tells her, you know, not to go to Lalo, to stay away from Lalo. But as we know, like, it's too little too late. And he doesn't realize this till a little later, obviously, where you already brought this into your house. You know, once you're in the game, you're in the game, and nothing is off limits, including the people that you love. So it's a little too late. They had made a pact when they got married that they wouldn't keep secrets from each other, especially if they wanted to keep secrets from each other. But here he does, and she doesn't. Again, I thought this is a violation of that rule between them, that she would hold that against him, and she did not. She did not. She's always understanding of him. She's always patient with him. She always tries to see the deeper humanity that is fighting within him, and it's almost like a reflection upon herself. We start seeing a lot of these all-seeing eye motifs, which is very common in Hollywood, and I'm not surprised. to see it on this show, but it is kind of striking how well snuck and just randomly they snuck it in. But we start really seeing it here. I never don't remember seeing it so much in other seasons, but now we start seeing it. It's obviously conscious. I'm not sure what the showrunner wants to say about it. I don't know if it's the typical tongue-in-cheek, in your face, this is what Hollywood is about, or if it's more about these characters journeying into that dark side that is that. Maybe a little bit of both. We have a discussion between Ermintrout and Gus Fring about Nacho, right? Ermintrout is still trying. He's still true to himself at the end of the day, and when something doesn't sit well with him, everything is off limits with these drug lord bosses on his, in his eyes. But when there's people like Nacho that are trying to get out of the game, that are trying to be, that are not quite as evil as these guys that they're working for, Ermintrout feels a certain kind of way about it. He has some level of conscience when it comes to that, and he's trying to get Nacho out of the game because Nacho has pretty much begged him to help him do that. But Gus Fring makes a very important point here, and it's true. And it's that the problem with Nacho is that he's like that dog that bites every owner that it has. And there's only two ways to deal with that kind of a dog. Either you have a firm hand with it, meaning the way that he basically is holding a gun to his father's head to have him comply, or you put it down, which means Nacho will die. And I think this is probably the clearest indication that we have of what's going to happen to Nacho. He's clearly not going to have a good end, but this is the first indication that we get of that finally in the show as to the direction that character's story arc is going. In true fashion to Lalo, before going to Mexico, he questions Saul's story, and just like in the beginning of the season, and like always with the character, show me, show me, show me, he wants to go find what happened to the car and discovers that something doesn't add up about the story because the car ended up in a ditch with bullet holes, and that's not what Saul had told him. So he goes to see Saul, and this is a great scene. Again, great triangulation on the shot with the three, the constant motif and the constant film school aesthetic mise en scène. But 3 times he forces Saul to tell the story. Saul tells the story exactly the same way, embellishing very little. Lalo says nothing until it gets to the point where he is basically calling him out for being a liar. Slip of the tongue. And this is where we see that, remember, Ermintrout will put up a game face, and then as soon as he no longer needs to, he'll stop. But not Saul. He will go to the grave with it, and that's a problem. And here it would have cost him his life if it wasn't for Kim. Kim understands what Lalo is getting at. Saul is stuck on his fake story. Now, there's obviously motivation behind that because he's playing on the Gus Fring side, so he can't expose Michael or Gus Fring, which if he told the real story, he would, and that would really change things for Lalo from this point on. So, fortunately, Kim steps in and saves the day, convinces Lalo that what happened to the car was that some kids found it and shot it up and threw it in a ditch. And so, for the first time, again, we see that this is where Lalo is weak. Now, was it because she's a female? I don't know. Was it because he wants to believe that some people are he can put his trust in some people? Because to some extent, a drug dealer or anyone needs to put faith in the people around them, right? You cannot go on without having some form of trust. But the problem is that Lalo is not from this world. He's from south of the border, and he's been forced to come north because of what happened to Hector. So he really does not have any friends here. He doesn't have any family that he can count on. So he's kind of forced to rely on people that he's hoping will pan out for him, and they don't. So when Kim tells him that he needs to get his house in order, she's kind of right. So perhaps that rang true to him so much that he was like, okay, I'm going to give him a pass. Nonetheless, that's what happens. And Saul finally has that moment of clarity where he realizes that that conversation he had with Ermintrout, where once you make decisions that put you on this road, despite your attempts to get off of the road, somehow you keep finding yourself back on the road. And he realizes that that does not spell anything good for Kim. And he vocalizes it to her. The communication between them, for the most part, is awesome at this point, where they're sincere with each other about everything, and they understand each other. It's despite being two highly dysfunctional individuals, they have a very functional relationship in terms of the communication and being honest with each other. And that's an important thing for him to realize, is because we get the sense, and again, the showrunner spends his time on this scene. He doesn't. It's not a throwaway scene. He doesn't try to get us through it fast. He spends the time on it because it's clear that this moment for Saul is going to determine his arc going forward, right? He realizes that for Kim to be safe, they're going to have to go separate ways at some point. It's just not clear when that's going to be just yet. Kim has given up her job at everything. She gave up Mesa Verde. She gave up her job at the firm. She is now unemployed, just like Saul. We can't have two unemployed people. This is a problem. And it's because of what happened to him. See what I'm saying again about how things happen. And they seem almost by chance, and they have tremendous effect on the trajectory of a person's life. Because she almost lost Saul with the whole drug cartel business when he went to pick up the money, she realizes that life is short and that she wants to spend her life doing what she loves, which is helping people with her pro bono cases, to have half a shot at a legal defense that they normally would not have a chance in hell of affording. That's what she wants to do with her life. And she realizes life is short. I could die tomorrow. I could lose, just like she almost lost Saul. It could all be over in a jiffy. I want to spend my life doing this. She was already kind of doing that with Mesa Verde, half and half, but now she wants to put all her eggs in that basket, which is kind of foolish, but we kind of understand why this sense of desperation, is happening to this character. And again, it's something that would not have happened if Saul had not made the decision to go for that money and gone through the experiences that he forced himself to go through. Howard confronts Kim, thinking that by telling him everything Saul has done to him, she is going to have an eye-opening, an awakening of understanding of what a piece of shit Saul is. And instead she laughs at him because Howard is the real piece of shit. But Howard is coming from an honest point in his heart at this point, Again, he really has work. Unlike them, he's gone to a therapist. He's actually worked at himself. He's worked through his problems, and he's coming to terms with them. Even by coming to them, and they are the ones who are behaving like assholes. And there's an interesting final exchange between her and him where she's like, you think you know Jimmy? I know Jimmy. And he's like, well, you know who really knew Jimmy? Chuck did. And so it's almost like a real slap in the face to all of us. Chuck's been dead now for 2 seasons. And we realize that Chuck was he wasn't as bad as we thought he was in the beginning. This is another amazing thing about this show, right? How there's no judgment involved with how these characters are presented. They're presented at face value, and it's up to you to dig into the inner workings of what's going on with these characters. Chuck seemed like a real hardball guy, and was, but it was like he was necessary, but also a restriction. You know, the best thing Jimmy could have done was just step away from his brother and from Law. But obviously, he met Kim, and that's what, I mean, it's interesting, again, happenstances that make us make decisions in our lives that then we cannot revert. You know, Jimmy decided to work in the mailroom of his brother's law office firm, and that's where he met Kim. And that's what motivated him, and his love for her and his infatuation with her motivated him to want to become a lawyer, something that he personally never really cared to do. He was always kind of a con artist, and Chuck knew this. Chuck understood that that was the integral characteristic of his brother. It was never going to change. There was no way for it to change, and he had no business in law. But he had no tact in how to help his brother, and how to guide his brother, and how to prevent his brother from making these decisions that led ultimately to Chuck's own death. You know, because it ended up becoming Chuck versus Jimmy over Jimmy's sense of what he needed to do to impress Kim. So Chuck did always know Jimmy, and Jimmy really was always not suited for law. He was always a Long Kong type of guy. He should have gone into something else. And this is a very, that it comes from Howard is just wow, you know? So he's actually progressed, he's developed, he's worked through his dysfunctions. So it's now already sad and tragic to see that at the end of this season, going into the next season, these guys are going to use Howard as their play toy, destroy his life and his career and his legacy so that they can get a payday of $2 million. Remember, we went from 8,000 to 100,000, and now it's 2 million. The stakes keep going higher. And Kim, before she liked making a mess, but then she would clean it up, now wants to make a mess and not give a shit. And that is a clear influence of being around Saul, whether she admits it or not to Howard at this point in time. We've had constant, in the last season, you know, we've had these scenes where the two drug families hand in their, you know, their money, their earned goods to the big head honcho. I don't know why I can't remember his name right now. Eladio, dressed in white in this shot. Another great shot, by the way. Look at how it's framed. And the question of showmanship, right? This man is not so much, yes, he's impressed by, first of all, he's impressed by how much money you're going to bring him, but he's more impressed by your showmanship, by the way that you do it, right? Hector would bring him rolls of bills tied up in rubber bands, while Gus Fring would bring it to him in blocks, saran wrapped nice and tight. And that was one level of him showing like, hey, this is what I prefer. Now, Bolsa bringing in Gus Fring's earnings to him the same way with the saran wrap. He's like, well, it doesn't seem like you brought me as much as last time, right? Which was the whole point of the Salamancas trying to sabotage Gus's operation. And here comes Lalo, who knows he's the suave one, right? He's got what Hector doesn't have, what any of the other Salamancas have. Again, he's cool-headed. He knows how to present. He's suave. He's got style. So of course, he presents his earnings by giving him this car, and in the trunk of the car, more money in a gift-wrapped box. And this guy is just eating it up, right? He says, "You've got showmanship. This is the man." Watching this again, I noticed that Don Eladio here, I believe it is Eladio, he's got that necklace around his neck. It's easy to miss that that the necklace has also the all-seeing eye. So this all-seeing eye motif is suddenly appearing more and more often and clearer as the season progresses. Um, this is basically the scene where I was already talking about how Kim is already now that she's now that she's jobless, she's unemployed, and Saul is unemployed, right? And she wants to do her pro bono, but they both need to figure out how they're going to live, right? Nobody else, none of us can live for free in this world. So how can she, make some quick cash, a big number of cash, so that she can do her pro bono life, but do it comfortably? And that's where she comes up with how they are going to somehow set up Howard so that sandpiper case from way back, like in season 1 or 2. I love how these things come full circle. Genius also. It goes to show that none of these things were throwaway, but that they were part of a bigger, ever bigger arc for this entire series. That if they do get Howard in some way to if they can set him up the right way, they'll be able to create such a catastrophe to the firm that they'll have to settle the Sandpiper thing right away because of the fallout. And they're cut because Saul was the original instigator of that case. Their cut is 2% of whatever the firm gets, which they do the math, it's $2 million. So that's where they're at. This is the final scene between Nacho and Lalo, where Nacho has come to the end of the road. He has to make a decision now. He can't play both sides anymore. And that really is going to make him vulnerable and to make his father vulnerable. So things are going to get very desperate for him on out. The beginning of the end for Nacho begins now at this point, and we'll see how it progresses in season 6. But it is a very important moment in the interaction and story arc of these two. Because Nacho's about to basically open the back door and let these mercenaries in, and they are going to ravage the Salamancas, and by sheer luck and sneakiness, Lalo's able to survive it, and that's an important thing. And here we have here we come full circle from last season to this season, right? Last season, after all was said and done, when the big triumph of the last season was that Saul, or Jimmy, was able to get his license to be a lawyer, his bar license back, decides to change his name to Saul Goodman, and he does the air pistols at Kim, and she realizes, okay, wow, this guy had us all including myself. He's willing to even lie to me to get what he wants. And the only thing that holds them together is their actual love for each other. That they don't lie about. And now she's become Kim Goodman, I guess. She's made that transition herself. And we get it visually, again, through mannerism, through the visual of her doing the air pistols, just like Saul did at the end of last season. Now she's doing it at the end of this season. It comes full circle. Her character is transforming into a Saul Goodman. And where it goes from here, it can't be any good. We know it's not going to be any good. We cut back to Salamanca, Lalo surviving the complete obliteration of his entire family down south of the border. Nobody survives but him. And he looks at where he was just sitting with Nacho that we saw, and noticing that, oh, Nacho is gone. He set me up. He was it all along. He finally has that tragic sense of how did I not see that? He put his faith in this guy. He was gonna make this guy a made man, essentially, and he betrayed him in the most deepest way of betrayal that there could be, which leads us to the very final shot of Lalo walking into the camera with a sense of determination that he is going to destroy. He has become these the ghost of death now. You know, he is death itself. And as he steps on the the ground, and it crunches under his feet, that crunching, they superimpose like thunder, as if he's becoming Thor, like a thunder god. He's about to bring down lightning upon his enemies and all those who have betrayed him. And it's really actually pretty effective. It sounds corny the way I'm saying it, but it's very effective. And this is where we're at. I mean, this is super exciting. So much. This is what an excellent show. This is one of the best. I think perhaps Peaky Blinders is the next one that's just as good. Gomorrah is good, but not as good as this. It's pretty freaking good, and I want to discuss Gomorrah, and I want to discuss Peaky Blinders. I got to get caught up with that one. But this is the first one that I wanted to get caught up with, and it did not fail. It did not disappoint in any way. And this is really what great writing, great film and TV is all about. Way better than House of the Dragon and anything else out there right now. I can't even think. This is top 3 for sure that's current right now. And I think I've given plenty of reasons as to why. Definitely check it out if you haven't. Enjoy it. 5 seasons. Every season is amazing.